Hi, and welcome to ThreatTraq Essentials. I'm here this week with Manny Ortiz. How are you doing, Manny?
Doing good, Don. Thanks for asking.
Great. Let's go over some of the basic lessons we can learn from this week's stories on ThreatTraq. First up, we had a story about a really big ransomware attack that happened in the past few days. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so this was the big news of the weekend. Kaseya being the company, unfortunately, having a bad weekend. And as we've seen in the past, this was a ransomware which seems to have some indications that it might be a supply chain attack. And unfortunately, Kaseya, like many other supply chain attacks that we've seen recently, have a lot of customers and users of their software. So the impact is great because you hit one company, and then you've got potentially hundreds, in this case, of other companies that are impacted by ransomware.
So what advice do we want to give people who are affected by this, or just in general advice about preventing from being a victim in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think the advice here is pretty typical of what the advice I think we've given in the past, which is, obviously have strong security controls, especially at the borders of your network, strong authentication, I think strong backup, which is, a backup and disaster recovery plan. I think are good options there. I think in general, being prepared, upfront is the advice that we give. Don't be caught flat-footed. Don't ever be caught where you don't have a plan in place. Go through tabletop exercises to go through how you would actually respond to one of these. You don't want to be going through these for the first time when it actually happens to you.
Now, in a related story, you talked to us about cyber insurance companies and how all these ransomware attacks are having a big effect on them and especially their premiums. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so this one is sort of looking at cyber insurance, and cyber insurance obviously these days is something that that I don't think is talked about as much, but it's clearly something that that companies have been getting into and buying policies for over the last couple of years as ransomware has severely ramped up. And I think what we're seeing now is because ransomware is so prevalent, we've got a lot of companies now that are paying out, and the insurance companies are now finding themselves at sort of that break-even point where, it's not as lucrative to create or sign these policies with these companies because the percentage of payouts is reaching that point where it's just not lucrative for a company. So it's a whole story about how what's happening in the industry and some of the changes that we may be seeing in the future.
And finally, John brought us a story about Trickbot, up to some new tricks. Tell me, what are those new tricks?
Yeah, I think this is, so Trickbot and Diavol, if we're saying that correctly, is the sort of the new twist to Trickbot, which is the banking Trojan that has been, around for quite some time. I think the real big change here, although it really hasn't been seen out in the wild yet, but, again, I think it's a little early to say that it's not going to have any effect. I think the biggest change there was sort of its encryption technique using asymmetric versus symmetric, and I think that's the biggest change here in terms of we don't really see a lot of malware out there that uses, in terms of encryption, ransomware where they're encrypting files. We don't usually see these malware samples using the asymmetric, because asymmetric is a much more costly calculation or operation, and so we usually see symmetric, and this one is using asymmetric, and I think that's the biggest difference that we're seeing with this latest Diavolt.
So what's the defense against that?
I think the defense against this is, again, this is the no different than any other ransomware. The fact that it's using asymmetric versus symmetric really doesn't matter from a protection perspective. I think, again, it's the standard sort of, make sure that you've got protections in place, make sure that you have your endpoints actually you have some sort of EDR solution in place, you have your disaster recovery plans in place. The method that they're using, the malware uses, has no real bearing. If you're vulnerable and you get your files encrypted, you have to have a good plan in place for recovery, right? The last thing that you want to do is actually pay out for the key, and so if you've got a plan in place to be able to roll back a disaster recovery plan, you're going to be in a much better place.
Well, thanks for all that great advice, Manny. Thank you all for watching. If you want to keep up with great advice like this every week, please like or subscribe below. And if you want to take a deeper look at any of these stories, just click on them and watch them in their entirety. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.